We like to believe we can recognize danger when we see it. That threats come with warning signs, red flags, obvious markers that tell us to stay away. But what happens when danger wears the mask of friendship? When the person you trust, the colleague you work alongside, harbors an obsession so dark that it will destroy everything you've built. This is the story of Gene Thurnau, a man who overcame heartbreak to find love again, only to have his life stolen by someone who claimed to be his friend. This is a story about obsession, about the terrifying reality that sometimes the greatest threats hide in plain sight, disguised as harmless acquaintances. Gene Thurnau was born on July 2, 1959 in Kansas City, Missouri. By the time he reached his mid-40s, he had become the kind of man everyone wanted to know. Charismatic, approachable, the type who could walk into a room and instantly put people at ease with nothing more than his warm smile and genuine interest in others. Those who knew Gene described him as magnetic, not in a flashy way, but in the quiet confidence of someone who had found his purpose in life. He had served his country in the Air Force, then transitioned into one of the most demanding careers imaginable, air traffic controller. This wasn't just a job. It was a calling that required nerves of steel, razor-sharp focus, and the ability to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. Gene excelled at it. His colleagues respected him. His supervisors trusted him, and everyone who worked with him genuinely liked him. He had that rare quality that made people feel valued, heard, seen. Outside of work, Gene was a devoted dog lover, the proud owner of 3 dachshunds that he treated like family. His friends described him as having a huge heart, an eternal optimist who always looked for the good in people and situations. But even the strongest hearts can break. Gene's 20-year marriage had been tested when his wife became seriously ill. For months, perhaps years, Gan devoted himself completely to her care. He was there through every doctor's appointment, every difficult night, every moment of fear and uncertainty. This was Gene loyalty personified. Love demonstrated through action, not just words. And then when she finally recovered, when the crisis had passed and life should have returned to normal, she delivered a crushing blow. She was leaving him for another man. Imagine that betrayal. After everything he had sacrificed, all the time and energy he had poured into her recovery, she walked away. Jean was devastated. The marriage that had defined 2 decades of his life was over, ended not by tragedy or distance, but by choice. Her choice. Gene did what many people do when faced with unbearable pain. He threw himself into his work at the Nebraska control tower, trying to drown his sorrow in the demanding rhythm of his profession. But everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of her, the house they'd shared, the places they'd been, even the colleagues who had known them as a couple. In 2002, Gene made a decision. He couldn't heal in a place that held so many painful memories. He requested a transfer to Florida, where his parents and siblings lived. It was time for a fresh start, a chance to rebuild his life somewhere new. At the Nebraska control tower, Gene had a colleague named Robert Dean Peterson. Everyone called him Bob. Where Gene was outgoing and charismatic, Bob was his polar opposite, quiet, introverted, almost invisible. He wasn't disliked. He simply wasn't known. Bob rarely talked about himself, rarely engaged in the casual conversations that build workplace friendships. But Bob had noticed John more than noticed him. He was drawn to him in a way that went far beyond normal professional respect or casual friendship. Bob watched John with fascination. He studied his mannerisms, his choices, his lifestyle, and slowly, subtly, Bob began to imitate him. When Gene mentioned he loved dachshunds, Bob bought one too. When Gene drove a particular car, Bob purchased the exact same model in the identical color. It started small, these echoes of Gene's life appearing in Bob's. To their coworkers, it seemed harmless, maybe a little odd, but nothing alarming. Just Bob, the shy guy trying to connect with someone he admired. Gene, being Gene, was kind to Bob. He was friendly, tactful, never making Bob feel excluded or strange. If anything, Gene seemed to be one of the few people Bob truly enjoyed spending time with around Gene. Bob came alive. He became animated, almost giddy. His entire demeanor changed. To anyone paying attention, it was clear Bob wasn't just impressed by Gene. He was captivated by him. Every movement Gene made, every decision he took seemed to hold Bob's complete attention. But admiration had crossed a line into something else, something darker, a quiet obsession that festered beneath the surface of workplace pleasantries. Still, nobody saw Bob as dangerous, eccentric, maybe, lonely, certainly, but harmless. Everyone thought Bob was just a good guy who happened to be shy. When Gene announced his transfer to Florida, Bob's reaction was notably different from their other colleagues. While everyone else supported Gene's decision to start fresh, Bob seemed genuinely upset. Gene was perhaps the closest person Bob had at work, the one connection that made his days bearable. And now, Gene was leaving. In 2003, Gene arrived in Tampa Bay, ready to begin his new chapter at St. Petersburg Clearwater International Airport. The Sunshine State welcomed him with open arms. His warm personality made him an instant favorite among his new colleagues. For the first time since his divorce, Gene felt like himself again. The decision to move had been absolutely right. And then he met her Wanita Formoso, though everyone called her Jay. She was also an air traffic controller, a single mother, highly respected in her field. Like Gene, she had recently emerged from the wreckage of a 20-year marriage. They understood each other's pain, their shared experience of starting over. Jean, ever the gentleman, didn't rush things. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, built on genuine connection, rather than desperation or loneliness. But from the very beginning, there was something special between them, something worth protecting, worth nurturing. For 2 years, they kept their relationship private at work, not from shame, but from a desire to keep something precious separate from their professional lives. But as their bond deepened, Gene knew he had found what he'd been searching for. JJ wasn't just a companion or a way to forget his ex-wife. She was his future. When Gene proposed, JJ was overjoyed. Finally, after so much pain and disappointment, fate had brought them together. They decided to build a new home in Lando Lakes, a quiet, secure, picturesque neighborhood, the perfect place for their fresh start. They had a modest wedding ceremony with close family and friends, and for the first time in years, both Gene and JJ felt truly, completely happy. But they couldn't have known that their happiness had an expiration date, that the threat to their future was already in motion, moving closer with every passing day. 3 months after Gan moved to Florida, something unexpected happened. Bob Peterson also relocated to Florida, and not just to Florida, but to the exact same facility where Gene worked, the St. Petersburg Clearwater Control Tower. Bob's explanation was simple. He wanted a fresh start, too, and there were openings at the facility. It would be foolish not to take the opportunity. Gene didn't quite know what to make of it. The coincidence felt strange, but Bob was professional, quiet, a solid employee. Maybe it really was just a coincidence. As Gene and JJ prepared to move into their dream home, they both decided to sell their existing houses. That's when Bob made an unusual offer. He wanted to buy Gene's house. Gene thought it was a bit odd, but saw nothing inherently wrong with it until Bob made a strange request. He wanted to purchase the house along with Gene's sheets and pillowcases. Gene was sure Bob was joking. Who asks to buy someone's used bedding? The sale went through, but naturally Gene did not leave his bed linens behind. Bob's disappointment was visible and unsettling. In 2006, Gene and JJ's new home was finally ready. They were overjoyed, excited to begin this new chapter of their lives together. But Bob kept insisting on visiting them at their new property. He claimed he had a special gift for them, something to mark their new beginning. But he couldn't bring it to work. The couple felt awkward about this. Bob hadn't been invited to their wedding. They weren't expecting a gift from him. They'd kept their professional boundaries clear. But Bob was persistent. When Bob finally arrived, he brought an expensive crystal vase. The lavishness of it made Gene and JJ uncomfortable, especially given that Bob hadn't been part of their wedding celebration. Feeling guilty, they made a decision they would come to regret. They invited Bob to stay for dinner. Bob, of course, was thrilled. This was exactly what he'd hoped for when bringing such an extravagant gift. The evening of November 1st, 2006 was meant to be ordinary, just a quiet dinner at the TH home in Pasco County. But from the moment Bob arrived, the atmosphere felt wrong. He was cheerful, talkative, but there was an intensity to his behavior that made Gene and JJ exchange uncomfortable glances. Bob arrived early and showed no signs of leaving. He consumed multiple servings of each course, settling in as if he planned to stay all evening. Then he presented them with another gift, a thick, leather-bound photo album. As Gon and JJ began flipping through the pages, their confusion turned to horror. Inside were professional-quality photographs documenting the entire construction of their home. Page after page captured the transformation from empty lot to finished house. There were images of their drapes, their furniture arrangements, intimate details of their private space. JJ's voice trembled as she asked the obvious question. "You've been coming to our house all this time." "Every couple of days," Bob replied cheerfully, pride evident in his voice. "I photographed everyone's houses from work." The revelation was chilling. Bob had been watching them, photographing their home without permission, invading their privacy under the guise of artistic interest. Gene and JJ exchanged furtive glances, feeling trapped. Bob showed no intention of leaving. Then, like a lifeline, JJ's adult daughter arrived. They had an appointment that evening. JJ explained she needed to leave, hoping Bob would take the hint and go. He didn't. Surprised and increasingly uncomfortable, JJ looked at her husband, hoping that by the time she returned, their unwanted guest would finally be gone. She had no idea this would be the last time she would see Gene alive. After JJ left with her daughter, Bob told Gene he had one more gift to give him, but it was in his car. He returned with a letter. We can only imagine the shock Gene must have felt as he read Bob's words. "I have loved you for some time now," Bob had written, "but I've always chickened out when I tried to tell you." This wasn't the affection of friendship. This was something else entirely, something obsessive and deeply disturbing. Bob confessed he wasn't sure if he was gay, but he knew he loved Gene, and the letter turned threatening. Bob stated he would not leave the house until they had an intimate encounter. "I feel like I've been living a lie all these years," Bob wrote, "and I just can't do it anymore. I've already asked for God's forgiveness." That final line should have been the ultimate warning sign. Bob had already asked for forgiveness. For what? For what he was about to do. When JJ returned home, Bob's car was gone. The initial wave of relief lasted only seconds. Then she saw the blood trail in the driveway. Then her husband's clothes in a bloody pile on the floor. Then the note on the end table addressed to Gene. Neither Gene nor Bob were anywhere to be found. JJ tried calling her husband, but his phone was at home. The amount of blood left no doubt that something terrible had happened. As she walked through the living room, something caught her eye, a bullet casing on the floor. In that moment, the horrifying truth crystallized. A gun had been fired inside her home, her husband had been shot, and Bob had taken him. JJ dialed 911, her hands shaking. Within minutes, Pasco County Sheriff's deputies were racing to the scene. A massive search began immediately for both men, the victim and the dangerous suspect. For JJ, it became a long, agonizing wait, clinging to the hope that somehow, impossibly, Gene was still alive. Officers raced to Bob Peterson's residence in Lutz, but the house stood dark and empty. Gon was nowhere to be found. During their investigation, deputies discovered something crucial, a rental agreement for a house in Safety Harbor, Florida. Bob had planned this in advance. 2 days after Gene's disappearance, deputies were dispatched to the Safety Harbor property. What they found inside was beyond disturbing. In the master bedroom, Bob Peterson lay on the bed wearing only a t-shirt and underwear. He had taken his own life. Beside him on the floor was Gene Thurnau, also shot. But the violence hadn't ended with the shooting. Gene's body had been mutilated, a final act that underscored the horrifying depth of Bob's obsession. Bob Peterson had stalked Gann across state lines, inserted himself into Gann's new life, invaded Gann's privacy, and when his advances were rejected, as they inevitably would be, he had committed an act of unspeakable violence. And then, unable to face the consequences of what he'd done, he had ended his own life. Gene Thurnau's death devastated everyone who knew him, but no one more than Wanita. The woman who had finally found happiness, who had built a home and a future with a man she loved, now had to comprehend how one act of obsessive violence had shattered everything. When JJ spoke to investigators, she described Bob's unusual behavior around John, but she insisted she had no idea of the depth of his obsession. How could she have known? Bob had seemed harmless, just another colleague, perhaps a bit odd, but never threatening. When investigators learned that Bob had propositioned Gann that night, JJ was certain her husband had firmly rejected him. Gann would never have reciprocated Bob's feelings. In the aftermath of this tragedy, JJ demonstrated remarkable compassion. "I don't hate Bob," she later said. "How can you hate someone who is mentally disturbed in an appearance on Investigation Discovery?" She reflected on the positive moments in her life, saying she felt fortunate to have known Gene and to have experienced what it was like to be truly loved. Coping with such a tragedy has been incredibly difficult, but JJ credits her faith in God with helping her stay strong. She now prefers to keep her current life private, but it appears she has found a measure of peace and move forward, carrying John's memory with her. This case raises disturbing questions about obsession, about the warning signs we miss or dismiss, about the danger of someone who views another person not as a human being with agency and autonomy, but as an object of desire to be possessed. Bob Peterson's behavior showed escalating red flags. The imitation, the request for personal items, the unwanted surveillance, the stalking across state lines. But each individual act taken alone could be explained away as eccentric, as socially awkward, as harmless. It's only in retrospect, with the full picture visible, that we can see the pattern of obsession building toward violence. Gene Thurnau was 47 years old when he died. He had survived the pain of divorce, rebuilt his life, found love again, and was on the cusp of the happiness he deserved. His life was stolen by someone he had shown nothing but kindness to, someone he had tried to befriend when others kept their distance. Rest in peace, Geno. Your life, though tragically brief, touched the hearts of those who knew you. You brought love, warmth, and laughter to your family and friends, and your memory lives on in their hearts. The joy you shared and the love you gave will never be forgotten. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you can be the first to hear about such real-life stories.